Welcome to Mom Breaks. This is a solo episode, which feels strange. I have enjoyed talking to people, and it feels silly to be in this room talking to myself. But I wanted to pause and reflect on the last stretch of episodes focused on the family partner experience around psychosis and navigating psychiatric crisis. I started this with an intention to understand how family members recognize and then act and get help when things go wrong. We had 6 conversations, different stories, different backgrounds, different family dynamics, and there are some themes that come up. So yes, wanted to talk about some of the patterns that stood out to me and a few thoughts about personal reflections as well as reflections on opportunities that I can see for better support and care moving forward. One of the things I'm taking away from this is that families need to really advocate for the care that they need and for quality care. They're navigating this whole experience often without any language to understand or research or know what is happening, and there's a lot of uncertainty. The things that come up as what families notice first, one was sleeplessness. This was across many of the stories, not just the I'm tired, but the inability to settle and turn your brain off when there is an opportunity to sleep. This came up repeatedly, and alongside that, behavior that just feels a little off. There are early warning signs that people don't know because they don't know the sort of storm that is brewing. Because, yeah, in the moment, it's easy to explain away what's happening to the stress and transition of the period of welcoming a baby into your family. And so often the reaction can be, oh, it's kind of strange, but let's get some sleep. Maybe it's the hormones, maybe it's the exhaustion. And postpartum psychosis is not on their radar. Most had never heard of it before and didn't understand the risks involved with not sleeping for days at a time, or also didn't understand what was going on in the mom's head. So one other thing that stood out was how partners described needing reassurance from other people before taking action. So texting family members, calling friends and connections who have some type of authority in healthcare or therapy, psychiatry, emergency response. And not necessarily postpartum specialists, just people they trusted to help answer the question, what is happening? Is this serious? Am I overreacting? Do I need emergency help? And this came up a couple times. I think that's deeply human, and it's tricky too because of the wax and wane of postpartum psychosis, that you might have moments where you're like, oh, I'm overreacting, it's fine. But there's some sort of escalation that happens where behavior is clearly bizarre, dangerous, a paranoia or disconnect from reality, where there's okay, this is not normal, we need help. And so that is where the psychosis itself is escalating and symptoms are developing further. Another big takeaway is how inconsistent the emergency and care experience is. And that was true in the survivor conversations today as well. Some families receive language around postpartum psychosis right away, even with the emergency care or crisis teams. And others don't hear the term at all during weeks of hospitalization. And some get a closer blend of medication to what we understand from Dr. Brink and other professionals in the space. Sometimes people get a blend of medication that is closer to the recommended standard, and other times people aren't getting any medication or inpatient time. So families are navigating health systems and managing all the details, sometimes without language to get education and understanding of what should be happening to advocate for better outcomes. And I noticed how beautiful and important community is in supporting families during this time, if that's coworkers, neighbors, family, of course, friends, doulas, therapists, as partners are juggling the visitation hours as well as their own workplace and managing the demands of their work. And like with the call-in episode, and sometimes even the spouse's workplace as well when they're in hospital and unable to be communicating with their own work, if that's relevant. So it doesn't end when the mom is admitted to a psych ward. There are breastfeeding logistics, medication transitions, and then also this transition to home afterward is a vulnerable stage. I felt this myself. Everyone's sort of sitting in this like, okay, what now? Like, are we good? Could symptoms return? What are we watching for? How do we know things are improved and in a good place? I wonder at my own experience, there was no talk or referral to an outpatient hospitalization program. I'm not sure why that is. Another thing I was wondering about through these conversations was if there is any sort of best practice around what is recommended for how to respond when someone is delusional or psychotic. I was wondering, is it good to ground someone by sort of showing how a delusion isn't correct? Should you get into long sort of debates about whatever they're swirling in? Do you validate what helps and what makes things worse? There is not research specifically looking at postpartum psychosis and family reactions or communication approaches. And that makes sense. Like, they're not going to focus randomized controlled trials on adjusting the family response like that. It doesn't feel ethical. They focus more on medication outcomes, therapy approaches, long-term management rather than caregiver interactions. There is one body of literature that I think is useful, or at least I think it's relevant. It's called Expressed Emotion. It was developed, I believe, in schizophrenia populations and then later reproduced or used in bipolar disorder research. And it looks at the emotional climate of the family around a patient. So in environments where criticism, hostility, and emotional over-involvement, this looks like volatility within the home environment. In those environments, there are poorer outcomes, more relapse, more hospitalization, and less adherence to treatment plans. Whereas calmer and emotionally supportive environments with less criticism or hostility, they correlate with greater stability and better recovery outcomes. Not super surprising, like we want to have stable and supportive people in our lives. And so this doesn't directly answer a question of should families validate delusions or debate them. There isn't really evidence supporting either of these paths, but I think that aggressively debating delusions and validating delusions could be not great. There is support for saying emotionally regulated, calm, and connected approaches are good. What you do want is for whoever's going through psychosis to feel like they can trust you with their experience and share what is happening. And so, of course, like you can't know what's going to trigger, and there's no way to totally predict how delusions and whatever mental narrative is going on, how it unfolds. but validating the emotional temperature and in that sort of supportive approach, moving towards or nudging towards treatment. So there is another branch of treatment that I'm aware of called CBT for psychosis. It's cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis, where clinicians engage thoughtfully with the experience underneath delusional beliefs, hallucinations, etc., rather than shutting conversations down or escalating confrontation. And so this is a clinical framework. It's not family guidance, but I do think there's something translatable there in like you're not trying to prove someone wrong. It's creating a sense of safety, of trust, reducing fear, and helping someone remain or feel connected enough to you and your recommendations to get care. So I think that balance feels really important. One phrase from the CBT for psychosis approach that I like is reality-based explanations. And I think this is helpful in the aftermath of psychosis as you look back and think about the delusions and the content and making sense of them through reality-based explanations can be helpful for outcomes. So like, for example, I was very sleep deprived and my mind was making sense of things on no sleep. And they were nonsensical. Like thinking through the explanations for whatever it is, if you feel like revisiting and hashing whatever the content of your psychosis included. Something else that stood out to me on the topic of recovery was therapy and growth afterward. Nearly everybody talked about therapy being important and a powerful experience for them to grow a lot as a human after the experience. People talked about gratitude and not changing, having gone through what they went through, though they wouldn't wish it on someone. People talked about being more empathetic, more aware of mental health, filled with more grace and compassion towards other people navigating a crisis, and just feeling generally more human in a life design and approach to how they live their life. Many also channeled the experience into advocacy work or a foundation or awareness efforts to try to support families and create better outcomes. So yeah, I really love that notion of this was the hardest thing and I'm grateful for what it taught me. Totally feel that way too. I would not wish postpartum psychosis on anyone. And I recognize how it has profoundly shaped a deeper empathy and appreciation for mental health, physical health too, relationships, being vulnerable and open about our experiences, and I'd also say community. Okay, a few other personal reflections. Each of these conversations to date have made me reflect on my own experience. There are nuggets that I'm like, oh, that is validating, or like, oh, that's interesting, that's different. And I have felt through these partner conversations, I thought it was interesting how both the partner and the spouse in psychosis, their professional backgrounds played into some of their actions and interpretations and the dynamics of the psychosis. And I was just thinking about how grateful I am that, and this is, I think there are affordances and pros and cons to whatever your background is. My husband happens to have 2 degrees in psychology and has taken many classes on abnormal psych. So I realized that that was lucky for me that he had some training in being able to recognize abnormal behaviors and symptoms of delusions and a disconnect from reality. I also didn't realize how lucky we were that we had my mother-in-law in town and right there with us to both give my husband reassurance and a boost of confidence that, yes, going to the ER is a good idea. I think it got us there earlier than if we had not had the support right there. And it also enabled him to be with me through the process of not just getting to the ER, but being in the ER and getting me admitted through voluntary admission while I was actively psychotic and not understanding understanding a different narrative of what was going on around me. So he helped me trust what was happening. He helped me flow through and feel emotionally okay as things progressed to being in the psych ward. And I don't know, maybe it would have been similar if I had gone in an ambulance. And I think everybody needs to get care how they can get care. It's just a personal reflection on how it could have been a different experience being handed off to flashing lights in an ambulance, and the ER experience could have been different too. And then also just thinking about the postpartum period itself, sleep deprivation was so there for me. I didn't have like a traumatic birth, but I did do an unmedicated birth, and it was just really intense. And then for me, it was more overwhelmed in the first month postpartum, having been in the ER for a cut on my hand that I drove myself to while actively bleeding, and just feeling a lot of load for a life with 2 young kids and master's program. And anyway, the sleep disruption is so consistent, and I think it's so normalized, and I think it would be good to not casually dismiss sleeplessness in the postpartum period as like, oh, get used to it, like, welcome to motherhood. Like, yes, newborn life is exhausting, but an inability to sleep paired with anxiety, racing thoughts, agitation, or behavioral changes, it needs attention. It's not just, hey, get used to it. And then traumatic birth experiences also, I feel, should have more support than is currently given. I think it would be brilliant to embed counseling and debriefing after every single birth, because birth is just inherently a lot. It's a very memorable experience. It's something that doesn't happen every day, and it changes your body. And so I did dig into some research around birth trauma counseling and postpartum mental health interventions. Thought this was interesting and wanted to share. I found a systematic review and meta-analysis that looked across dozens of studies, including randomized controlled trials, examining psychological interventions after traumatic birth experiences. So one of the major findings was that structured postpartum psychological support, especially in the early days after birth, can significantly reduce symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and negative mood outcomes. This wasn't just, hey, tell me how that went, vent about your experience, but rather structured and trauma-focused approaches. So like trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, guided postpartum processing interventions. In the early period, timing matters. So in the first day or two, being able to sit down and process can really help after difficult births, emergency deliveries, NICU stays, or anything where drastic outcomes or severe, if they're seeing severe mental health needs too, like start there, like bring a counselor in to start talking through it. So a few other opportunities that feel clear to me. First, better education around perinatal mood and anxiety disorders broadly, including postpartum psychosis. Understanding the symptoms, and this is for families and providers in OBGYN, in psychiatry, in pediatrics. focusing on sleep disruption, rapid behavioral changes, confusion, paranoia, as well as bipolar risk factors. Family history screening should be part of prenatal care. There have been a few stories to date where there was a known family history of mental health or bipolar disorder, but there was no screening or education around what to watch out for or what risks they had, including like even just education on postpartum psychosis being a thing. I also think there's an opportunity for stronger connections between emergency departments and perinatal mental health specialists, because postpartum patients, and maybe this is biased because of my own experience in a general ER and general inpatient care unit, there was little specific expertise in postpartum disorders. And so, yeah, I think it would be good. And I have heard of this, of having a specialist that they could call to help with treatment plans and approach. Another huge need is more visible crisis resources. I know there are hotlines. They are so great and need to be more well known. The families from these partner conversations, people didn't know that they were experiencing a, postpartum mood and anxiety disorder. Didn't know there was a hotline buried somewhere online. And so when someone is acutely psychotic, the resources are people saved in their phone and 911. Like, those are where people are going and are trying to survive the next hour. These stories highlight how any of these stories could end in tragedy. I think it's just important to keep talking, sharing stories, and making it known that this is a thing, and it is scary, but it's also treatable, and things are going to be okay. I recently watched the documentary More Than Blue, which highlights a range of perinatal mental health experiences with women sharing the context of their life and their pregnancy and their postpartum experiences. And I thought it was a lovely film to facilitate important dialogue around these disorders and the reality of motherhood across the spectrum. They did have one survivor of psychosis as well, and I appreciated that. I'm glad that that was reflected. I did wish they didn't use the word rare when they were talking about postpartum psychosis, but totally recommend watching it and sharing it, as it's out of MGHP3, and Dr. Cohen and his team are behind the documentary and so support all the important work they're doing to support families and women and reproductive psychiatry. In the film, there is a woman who talks about reaching a stage in her recovery after she had a, suicidal ideation and a really hard time with postpartum depression. She talked about her recovery over time and how she reached a spot where she wanted to give back and help other people, and went back to school and changed her whole background to get into reproductive mental health. So I think I was just reflecting on how this podcast has been a bit of that stage for me in wanting to give back and help other people. I'm so grateful to everyone who has shared their stories with me, sent messages, recorded with me, met with me, offered reflections, and everybody who's listened across the world. I know I've mentioned before the possibility of wrapping up the podcast. I have been able to set things up in a way that feels a little bit more sustainable. And I do have several conversations in the works planned to be released through the summer. No promises about perfect consistency, especially as my kids are nearly out of school and summer camps are not, I mean, it's just summer. It's summer vibes. And I have always sort of approached this project as a fun passion project, and it fits around work and family life. So if these conversations have meant something to you, I would so appreciate if you would follow the show on whatever platform you are listening on. I have migrated things over to Substack and would appreciate a follow there. And yeah, that is a wrap. Thank you for listening. And as always, be kind to your mind.